Yeah.
Cool, I'm happy with that. Yeah, that's what we had
Okay.
initially, but yeah. Can I just
We
try
got
that
there.
again? Just
If you'd like, yes.
Is that working? Is that working? Hello? Is that working? Was that working?
Sorry, Neil. The other screen had just timed out, so my mic wasn't activated. But yes, we could see that okay. So hopefully that's there. Okay.
Nobody has a spare pen.
Thank you.
I'm always well equipped. And today, are you sure? I've got a spare, don't worry. Got a spare, thank you. There we go, I know. It's the advantage of being in this big seat here. I was going to even ask people online if they had one. Aye. Right.
And you're aware that we have the slight time delay with remote participants. Yeah. You're aware of that for a second, thanks.
Right. Going 2 o'clock. All my clocks say 2 o'clock. Ready to make a start?
I think we're just about there. The screen that we're now having issues with.
All right.
Tracy, sorry.
We got both. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to make a start. We think when we have remote participation, there is a slight delay. So I'm just going to ask for a wee bit of patience because of the online element to the meeting. If there's to be a slight pause, that's the reason why. Can I start this meeting and ask Helen just to run through some of the procedural points?
Thank you, Chair. For those in the room, can I check you've inserted your card into the right-hand side of the delegate unit? Your name should appear on the screen and the name of this meeting appears at the top of your delegate screen. Press Enter Meeting. If your card is not working, we can issue you with a spare AV card. If you wish to speak, please press Request to Speak on the delegate unit and press again to switch off. When speaking, please ensure you are close enough to your microphone for your voice to be picked up and it is pointed towards you. This will ensure remote participants can hear. For those in the room using laptops, please ensure you have used F5 and F8 to mute your microphones to ensure there is no interference. For those participating remotely, if you need to message the clerk, please use the chat button on Confero. Also, please wait to speak until you appear on screen, as there can be a delay. If you are speaking and asking a question, please wait until the conclusion prior to deactivating your mic in the event you wish to come back in with a supplementary, as this can reduce any time lag. If you lose connection or have any technical issues, please alert the clerk's assistant by text on 07385 370069 and they will contact colleagues in IT for assistance. This meeting is being recorded as well as live streamed to be made available on the Council's YouTube channel. Where a member has a declaration of interest, they are required to leave the meeting prior to consideration of that item. Please advise at the stage you are leaving the meeting. For those participating remotely, you'll be sent an email advising when you can rejoin the meeting. The meeting is now being recorded, and I'll take the sederunt for the Community Wealth Building Commission on 6th of September 2022. I see we have Councillor Allison present, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Robb. Is Councillor Brown with us? No. And Councillor Cooper? No. Apologies from Councillor Ross. I have Councillor Margaret Walker with us. Apologies from Cleland Snedden. Paul Manning is with us, and apologies from Suman Singupta. Andy Ed is present. We have Josephine Pravin Kumar joining remotely, as is Stephen Sweeney and Thomas Adamson. And also from Scottish Government, Tracy Jackson and Neil Mcenroy present, and other council officers. I'll hand you back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come to the first item, which is declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Can I now come to the minutes of the previous meeting, which is item 2? Are there any issues to be raised arising from the previous meeting? I see none. Can I ask that we... Oh, apologies. I have Geraldine McCann. Sorry. It appears to be an accident.
Apologies, Chair, it was an accident.
Right, okay. These are the hiccups with this new system. Don't worry about that. So there are no issues arising. Actually, I now have requesting to speak. I have Margaret Cooper. Councillor Cooper.
Just to say I'm present.
Right, thanks. We'll record that, Councillor Cooper. Thank you. Okay. Right, so there being no issues arising from Councillor Brown, I have a feeling this may be to update the sederunt. So, Councillor Brown, can we come to Councillor Brown? We can hear you now, Councillor Brown.
You can hear me, right? Sorry, I wasn't sure to press something there. No, same as Councillor Cooper to say I've managed after some trouble to join the meeting.
Right. I think there is a bit of a delay. So again, apologies to people for that. And there is also a road closure in the vicinity of the building. So Andy Aird from the FSB has also joined us. Okay, right. For the final time, I don't think there are any issues arising from the minutes of the previous meeting, so can I ask that we agree them as a correct record? We are agreed. Can I come now to item 3? And item 3 is a input from CLES and the Scottish Government, and we have here, and I'm pleased to welcome to the meeting virtually, Neil Mcenroy and Tracy Jackson, from the local economic delivery team at the Scottish Government, and I think we can pass over to you for a presentation now, and if there are any issues with that, I'm going to have to put myself into Helen's hands to negotiate this, but I think we're able to pass over to you now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invite. I'm Neil Mcenroy. I'm a Community Wealth Advisor in the Scottish Government. 2 days a week, I'm seconded in from the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. I'm also 3 days a week work for an American think tank called the Democracy Collaborative, who actually came up with the term and concept of community wealth building. I'm joined today with Tracy Jackson. Hopefully Tracy's on the call. We had a few technical hiccups, but Tracy, are you there? And I'm ready to share the slides for you to go through them. Is that okay? No.
I think we have Tracy, but Tracy, bear with me. You should be coming on now.
We're going to do a double header, Chair. So Tracy will go first, then me. But
Well,
I'll share the slides now.
Right. I think there may be an issue with. I think there may be an issue with it. What I think we might have to do is come to Tracy, but let me just work this out, and we'll try to bring Tracy in as soon as possible here, Neil. Okay. Right.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can indeed.
Great.
Can you see the slides okay, folks?
Yes, we can see the slides as well, thanks. It seems to be
Tracy,
working.
you just give me a wee verbal and I'll move the slides on for you, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil. You'll be my glamorous assistant for this afternoon.
Cut the glamorous out.
So, afternoon, everybody, and thank you, as Neil said, for inviting us along to talk to you this afternoon. I am Tracy Jackson. I'm one of the policy managers within the team at Scottish Government working on community wealth building. There are 6 of us at the moment working in the team with Neil's support as the special advisor for community wealth building. The team is headed up by Stephen White, and at the end of the presentation we have everybody's contact details if you wish to come back to us on anything at all that we raised today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a kind of update on community wealth building from Scottish Government point of view, and some of this I'm sure you'll already know, but if you could bear with me. Neil, could you pop on the next slide, please? So community wealth building, as you will all know because you're involved in it at the moment in your area, is an economic development model and approach that offers system change, and that is something that our Minister is really, really keen on. He talks about rewiring our economy from the grassroots, if you like, so from local communities, local authority areas up, aggregating to achieving our wellbeing economy ambitions. It's about being able to practically deliver what we want, and it has a focus on the pre-distribution of wealth that is generated through our economy rather than focusing solely on redistribution after we've actually created that wealth. We do need redistribution, but actually it's better if we can pre-distribute as well. So don't want to over-egg some of this for you, so I'll move on to the next slide. So community wealth building has 5 pillars, and I'm sure you're aware of these because you've already developed your own action plan, and I believe are actually looking to update that and refresh it for this year. So you'll be aware that the 5 pillars are inclusive ownership, and that is where we can ensure that through developing cooperatives, employee-owned businesses and firms, that people have a greater stake in the economy. So they have a stake, an ownership stake that they actually are producing and owning and can develop as they go along. We want to, through the workforce pillar, increase fair work. So we want people to be getting paid a fair wage for the work that they're doing. And we want local labour markets that are just and support the well-being of the communities in which people are living and operating. Under spending, we want to maximise the community benefits that communities receive through the public spending and other spending that happens within their community. So that's about how we procure and commission goods. And again, that's something that I know that you are already working on and looking towards. We also have land and property. So that's about just and fair use of land and property and about maximising the benefits that that land can have for the communities and not doing things at the expense of our environment. And the final pillar is our finance pillar. So that's about the flows of investment that are coming into our communities and how can we ensure that they are ethical? How can we ensure that we're encouraging big business and big banks to think about investing in our communities and the benefit that that might well bring to them, both in terms of financial but also in terms of social benefit as well. Neil, could you move on to the next slide? As part of that, as part of community wealth building, we talk about anchor institutions. And our anchor institutions are essentially people in the room today, this virtual room we're all a part of, That is organisations who have a tie to that area. So they're not going to just up and leave. You know, South Lanarkshire Council isn't going to leave South Lanarkshire. That provides that sticky capital, that's financial, economic, intellectual, social, human capital that actually can work well for that community. It takes account of businesses and community voluntary sector organisations because they can act as anchors as well, and we're seeing examples of that. Scottish Government itself, local authorities are also anchors, and it's about seeing yourself as being more than the service that you provide. So identifying those economic levers at your disposal and maximising them for the benefits of the communities in which we're all based. Wanted to talk about the story so far in terms of community wealth building. So Neil, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So community wealth building so far, well, we've been working very much in terms of policy. So you'll have seen in the recent NSET, the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, we've set out a 10-year plan. And as part of that 10-year plan, we want to bring forward community wealth building legislation and help implement and embed community wealth building economic development model across Scotland. To do that, we've been engaging with a range of policy areas because community wealth building, as you will all know, touches on a number of different areas and a number of different policy areas. So we have to ensure that we're aligning as much as we possibly can. And for instance, that leads us to think about things like the review of the Community Empowerment Act. It gets us to think about the Land Reform Bill that was recently consulted on. Also gets us to think about the National Planning Framework, so NPF4, and how that now has community wealth building embedded in it as part of what people should be looking at when they're making planning decisions. In terms of practice, we have been supporting 5 pilot areas: Clackmannanshire, South of Scotland, Western Isles, T-Cities, which is Fife, and the Glasgow City region. They've all taken a slightly different approach. Some of the pilot areas are looking at all 5 pillars of community wealth building. Some are focusing in on a couple of those areas. We've also committed 3 million to advance community wealth building through the Ayrshire Growth Deal. And at the moment, we think that well over half to 2/3 of local authorities are currently looking at or are currently implementing community wealth building. And as well as that, we've got some industry bodies and sectors that are looking at how they can support community wealth building, most notably our NHS colleagues, Public Health Scotland as well. As part of our COVID recovery strategy, we set out a commitment to support all 32 local authorities to develop a community wealth building plan as part of their overall recovery plans. And in order to help that, to help share the learning, we are in partnership with EDAS at the moment, who have developed communities of practice and open sessions on community wealth building, and are currently working on a community wealth building guide, which we hope will support areas that are looking to take forward community wealth building. So final slide from me, Neil, if you could move on. Thinking about our next steps. So in terms of where is Scottish Government going with this? So within the Programme for Government 2021 and NSET, we committed to introduce the legislation. Our aim for that legislation, and through all the stakeholder engagement we've been having recently, is to identify areas that are actually stifling the implementation of community wealth building and stopping us from realising the full benefits of this approach. To help us in that, we have a community wealth building bill steering group, which is chaired by Mr. Arthur, our Minister, the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. And he's been very clear that he wants us to be ambitious and bold in everything we do with regards to community wealth building, and that he wants that legislation to come forward that is actually enabling and supports the implementation of community wealth building and isn't interested in legislating just for the sake of legislation. So I'm going to hand over now to Neil, who is going to talk to you about the good practice that we're seeing coming through already, which I think is what you're probably more interested in hearing. So thank you very much for your attention so far.
Thanks, Tracy. I hope that's been interesting so far. I suppose what I'm going to do now is just go through general sort of tips, I suppose, and some good stuff that's happening. Some of this you're on this journey anyway. I've got quite a lot of detail on this slide, but I'll not go through it all. But firstly, just in terms of good general practice. I mean, you've done a lot anyway in South Lanarkshire vis-a-vis your action plan and so forth, and also setting up the Community Wealth Building Commission, which is linking that into community planning partnerships, a kind of key element to this in terms of the governance to create that breadth and depth and heft, if you like, to the community wealth building agenda. Also important to think about anchor charters, all the major players that Tracy alluded to there, and think about their role, understand their role, and advance their role as employers, purchasers, and land and property owners, and how can they turn the dial and do a bit more in terms of what they're already doing across all of the major institutions in South Lanarkshire. And also, I think the last point there is maybe particularly important. How do you think about your own internal working practices in South Lanarkshire? So you're linking in economic development with procurement, with business support, with employability services. I always say procurement, the spending you have, as well as other anchor organisations, that's a major economic lever. And we have a kind of say over it because it's democratic money, if you like. So to see that as an economic lever, to see it as a key facet of your wider economic development, it's a little bit of a cultural mind shift there, but I think that's important in terms of your internal working practice and culture. Economic development and procurement closely linked, and procurement seen as key economic development lever. Just moving on to these are just some ideas. We've got a growing list of good stuff happening around Scotland and elsewhere. And as I say, I work part of my time in the US at the moment on community wealth building, but just in the land and property pillar, again, I won't go through it in all detail, but a good understanding of the land and property assets held by the anchors, those institutions in South Lanarkshire, and how it could be used effectively and productively, not just for economic use, but environmental and social gain, and thinking deeply about those land and property assets. How can community wealth building, create the frame by which there's more municipal or community ownership of things like energy production, as you're seeing in Preston, North Ayrshire, Western Isles. How you think about community wealth building can address vacant and derelict land to support local ownership more and expansion of local ownership. You're seeing a lot of that in Chicago in the States for community land trusts, a little bit going on in Glasgow City region and also in Clacks. And also community wealth building allows to make the case more for community ownership of land and property, particularly in our towns and our buildings and properties within our town centres. So that's just a wee feel for some of the wee stuff that's happening around land and property pillar. In terms of spending, I think one of the key things here is to think about that totality of public spending across all the anchors, all the budgets across all of the partner organisations, and how that's a key economic lever for the economy of that place. Very big in Preston, growing in North Ayrshire, and also Cleveland, Ohio, where community wealth building started. That was what it was all about to begin with. It was the major public institutions coming together to create create demand within the economy and help local residents, local communities who are suffering under the cost of deindustrialisation at that time. Obviously, returning more spend to local, regional, national economy. The third point there, use the pre-commissioning process before you even go out to procurement to actually think about how you want to shape local markets and supply chains.
Hang on a wee second. I'm sorry to interrupt. I've got a point coming in to interrupt in the room. So hang on a second, Kirsten.
Apologies. So just ask if, moved the slide on now so we could read the points. It was just a wee bit of a delay in moving the slide on.
Right, so is this issue? I don't know if you picked that up, Neil. With there's a delay, so it's just as you're moving the slides on, there is a slight delay. So I'll give
a wee pause, Chair.
Right.
I'll do a wee pause. Is that spending slide up now?
I think that's the spending one there. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry about that, folks. I forgot about the wee delay.
Right, no problem. Thanks a lot.
Good. Thanks for the interjection. So, think about before you even go out to tender, how you can actually shape local markets, supply chain to service that demand, if you like, and think about that across all the anchors. Things like reducing carbon footprint of supply by using local suppliers, a big thing in Salford, in Greater Manchester, and also reducing costs. This is always a thing. It seems like, local suppliers, that they're going to be more expensive. Not necessarily, because you can get more entrants to the market by improving the number of local suppliers who can compete on quality, but also cost So more entrants to the market, and we're seeing more entrants market in some goods and services around Preston and in Lambeth and London, which actually is reducing the costs in a sense because there's more competition. In terms of workforce pillar, I mean, clearly, application of the Fair Work policies locally through Fair Work charters, which we're seeing emerging now in Fife and in Clackmannanshire, encouraging developments of intermediate labour market to address long-term unemployment and worklessness. This is like the development of before people join the formal labour market, you create entities that are given them a job before they can enter a fully fledged employment, if you like. Support reduction in gender pay gap, and the Clacks are certainly on that. And as I say, it's a repeat there, actually encouraging the take up of fair work across anchors within the community planning partnerships. And Fife, there's lots to learn and experience from what they're doing over there. In terms of inclusive ownership, I think one of the key things here is creating an ecosystem of support for different forms of ownership in the model. You're seeing that in Plymouth, down in the southwest, Barcelona, and California and the US have got lots of different ecosystem of support that isn't just business support, it's business support, cooperative support, employee ownership support, social interest support, all in kind of one hub, if you like. And I think there is this need to, no wrong door. One door you go in, you're interested in doing something, it could be your own business, it could be a co-op, and you get the same sort of support. I think there's something interesting in all that to grow that kind of inclusive ownership kind of pillar. I think to upscale employee ownership, particularly to compete effectively in the tender process, and that does relate also employee ownership. Retirees of a business owner, how can you make that shift where they don't just sell that business off? You actually have a chance for the employees to take ownership of that business, supporting that transition. Also exploring how different form of business models, co-ops, community business, social enterprise can play into a specific sector. And in the south of Scotland, they're looking specifically at the housing sector and how they support local suppliers into the green retrofit of the social housing stock, which is an interesting development down there in the south of Scotland. And finally, last but not least, the finance pillar. I mean, I think the key thing here is greater alignment and joining up with public funds through a community wealth building lens. In America, you've got the American Recovery Plan funding, which in some places like Chicago and in Boston, community wealth building is coming like a lens across those funding to direct and steer it towards community wealth building type of activities. But similarly, the growth deal spending from the Scottish Government, apologies for the spelling mistake, that also is important in terms of bending that spend towards community wealth building type projects. Things like credit unions, community shares, really important in terms of that financial ecosystem that Tracy talked about. Pension funds, how we can bend and cajole Strathclyde Pension Fund, for instance, to diversify investment towards local opportunities, perhaps within South Lanarkshire. And of course, a new type of sustainable banking that supports our communities, our people, our local endeavour and craft and ingenuity, if you like. And also we've got the Scottish National Investment Bank that potentially could start to pick up through its new missions some of this new financial architecture for community wealth building. I hope all that's been really useful for you. There's all of us. Stephen White is our boss in the community wealth building team. There's me and Tracy, and also Julie McLaughlin, who's leading on the legislative work in the Scottish Government. So they're us and my colleagues, and I'll stop sharing. I hope that was okay, and sorry about the wee delay, but happy to take any questions or thoughts.
No, listen, thanks very much for that, Neil and Tracy. It's been really useful and thought-provoking. I'm going to abuse my position as the chair by asking some of the first questions here, and to make sure we kind of get off to. Well, basically to make sure we go off to the start that I want us to, because there's a few things from that I'm keen to ask about. So first of all, later on in this meeting, we are looking at updating the risk register, our community wealth building risk register, to recognise the kind of cost of living the impact of the cost of the living. A lot of our work in this has been looking at the kind of a framework through which to achieve some long-term change in the economy, and then we're hit with a very sudden spike in inflation and a very acute problem that we face immediately. I'm just wondering if the kind of cost of living issues are factoring into your work right now, and if so, if there's any advice or any thoughts that you have on that you're keen to share. And the other area for me, I also chair the Community Planning Partnership, and I think that I totally agree with these points around, encouraging our anchor institutions and other institutions to look at this with through a community wealth building lens. You mentioned anchor charters earlier on. That was one of the suggestions. I'm just wondering to what extent we've seen them developed elsewhere, and if there's any sort of good practice arising from that you think it's useful for us to share. And while the thought's in my head, I'm just curious about the level of engagement from, say, Scottish Enterprise and at the economic development agencies at that level, because a lot of the focus around community wealth building, for understandable reasons, has been on the economic and procurement functions of local government and the public sector at a local level. But actually, there's a pretty big shift in economic thinking that to me seems that it still has to happen. So I'm just wondering what engagement and involvement you have from Scottish Enterprise at that level or the other economic development agencies. And do they have community wealth building strategies, or is community wealth building reflected in their strategies? So those are my 3 questions to get us off to a start. Cheers.
Let's start, Stacey.
Yeah, if you want, Neil, yeah. Go for it.
You could maybe come in with a tricky one about the Scottish Enterprise and economic agencies.
I did meet with them recently, so I probably know more than you, yep.
I totally. They're great questions, actually. And the cost of living, it hangs the sword of Damocles, even worse than that, over us at the moment. And it's right, we need to do whatever we can to avert the crises facing many people and households right this very minute. But of course, community wealth building can help with that. But of course, we need to think about the deeper systemic elements that cause the cost of living crisis in the first place. And part of that is about energy ownership, diversification of supply, and you need to have an eye on, what can you do to create more local supply, more local ownership of energy, including municipal ownership, municipal solar, and so forth. And Preston's on that, as well as, I think North Ayrshire have got plans for that too. So we need to think, obviously, focus on the crisis now, but there's the wider underpinning elements like energy. I think fair work agenda, so important that we have great industrial relations. We have a community, a culture of work in Scotland and in South Lanarkshire that sees workers not as a cost, but obviously as a key input to productivity and well-being for the wider community. And that's important there to emphasise during the cost of living crisis. And procurement, I mean, at this point in time, every single pound that all of our anchor institutions spend is vitally important to create resilience in the local economy and the Scottish economy. There's not a pound to be wasted in terms of where we're buying our goods and services. So we do need, what the answer really, Chair, is that we do need a focus immediately on that cost of living crisis, but we have to have one eye on the short, medium, longer term in terms of systemic elements that create more resilience in the economy moving forward, and community wealth building offers that. On anchor charters, they're very much about maturing a culture of those anchors working in and for that place as purchasers, as employers, as land and property owners. And North Ayrshire has a good anchor charter coming out of the Commission, which is very much signing up to things, but it starts to turn the dial in a culture of collective solidarity, if I can use that phrase, of working together around the pillars of community wealth building. So I think anchor charters in North Ayrshire, maybe look at that as perhaps an example. Though there's others in the US which are more beefier, certainly I could, of different contexts that show what can be done at a more even bigger scale, for instance, in Cleveland, around anchor charters. And on Scottish Enterprise, I'll pass that over to Tracy and maybe other points you want to raise on the other points, Tracy. Sorry for
No,
you're more in tune with that.
not at all. I think in terms of the anchor charters, I think one of the things that I would add to that is that it is about a starting point in terms of the anchors. So I think there's got to be a recognition that, you know, some of our anchor institutions, some of the anchor organisations locally don't have economic development departments. They don't have maybe the experience that we might have within local government around community benefits and maximising that spend for those wider, if you like, economic benefits for a local community. So there is something about almost teaching them our experience, if you like, and them learning from what's happening already in local authorities. So, and I know that NHS, for instance, and Public Health Scotland are all thinking about how can we maximise community benefits, what can we do, for instance, around employability support, especially around that Neil was talking about earlier in terms of joining up the demand for workers with the workers, if you like, that are available in a locality, and how can we upskill them and support them to move into those roles through employability. So there is something around that. And I think the other thing that I liked around the anchor charters and the work that's underway is that it establishes a baseline. So what we're seeing in some of the areas is that they're actually using that anchor charter to say, okay, here's what we all want to do. Where are you currently at, and what support do you need in order to amplify what you're doing? How can we increase what you're doing? How can we maximise that impact? So I think there is something about the anchor charter actually being, if you like, a living document, something that helps you to monitor and progress with community wealth building, not just a document you sign and then forget about for the next 6 months till you want to review it. In terms of what's happening across our enterprise agencies, so SOSI, South of Scotland, is actually one of our pilot areas, and they're unique in a way in that they have 2 projects underway at the moment. So they're looking at community wealth building as an organisation and applying that lens across everything they do, but also, as Neil alluded to earlier, looking at the retrofitting of the housing stock with the local landlords there. And they're also looking at how they can address some skills shortages and recruitment problems that they're having in social care in Dumfries and Galloway using that community wealth building lens. High are really up on community wealth building and are actually part of our community wealth building steering group. And Scottish Enterprise, to give them the proper title instead of SE, are actually in discussions with us just now around how they can influence the buy-in, if you like, across the whole of the organisation for community wealth building. What I would say is we've got pockets of people and pockets of teams that are really interested in community wealth building who see the benefit of it. But we need to kind of widen that out. And I think that's something that we all probably encounter at the outset with community wealth building, about how do we bring everybody with us, and not everybody's at the same pace. So, for instance, Scottish Enterprise are thinking about how they react to NSET. And as you'll all be aware, community wealth building legislation is in there. So they're asking us about, okay, what are your expectations of us? What do you want us to do? And we're asking them to do things like amplify what they're already doing. So you've got CDS, so the Cooperative Development team there that Dara heads up. How can we make better use of them? How can we support more employee-owned cooperative businesses using that team? How can they support other local authority areas, for instance, who are looking to try and bring that in as part of their business support? Could they offer training? So there is work underway just now. But I think it's fair to say that they're at kind of development stages and looking to see what more they could do.
So thank you, both of you, for that. I'm going to throw out to anyone either joining online or in the chamber just now that would like to ask a question. Just press your request to speak buttons. Okay, I have a question from Councillor Allison.
Thanks. What you've been talking about there requires a lot of buy-in from different people with different priorities. My own background is the rural area, which isn't necessarily going to be the same requirement as what you have in an urban environment. How do these priorities stack up? For instance, planning is often seen to be difficult in some cases in the rural area. So how do you manage to develop businesses to help the community there if planning isn't going to buy into this? Or is there a priority for community wealth building over planning? How does that tie in to other people who want their view or who want it as their leisure activity rather than their business? How do these things all tie in? Because community wealth building has to be for the people in the rural area who live and work in the rural area as well.
I think that's a really excellent point again, Councillor Allison. You know, community wealth building started urban, but it does involve rural areas, and Western Isles, a very rural area, is one of the pilots. And in many senses, rural areas get community wealth more readily because there is in some sense, a natural coming together, if you like, than you maybe wouldn't get in urban areas. But the buy-in's an important point. I think the buy-in here is like, well, two scales to this. One is there's buy-in at an economic strategy level. So, an economic strategy for South Lanarkshire, people need to be bought in across all public, social and commercial sectors, as well as all different parts of South Lanarkshire. So it's important buy-in at that level. It's also important, though, that the Scottish Government, and that's part of the reason for potentially go down a legislative route, is to enable and empower, to get rid of some of the inertias and barriers that local areas and local people face so they can do the right thing and do community wealth building. So we're looking at that, and you'll see more about that when the consultation comes out. And anything that you can say, well, this is a big block or barrier as regard planning, then we need to hear that, and that will be fed into the machinery of government and potentially the legislation. But it's a quite a philosophical question you ask, really, because it's like, how do you get buy-in for anything? It is about interaction, it is about power, it's about resources, it's about weight, it's about trust in place and believing you're doing things collectively for that place. And community wealth building is seeking to stimulate a different type of thinking about how we think about the economy and people and places within that economy. So it's a cultural shift as well as policy and legislative shift. And that's how, the more you have commissions, the more you have this dialogue, I think it's all the greater good, as long as it doesn't become a talking shop. But it is the good to create that a culture of trying to rethink how the economy works and who it works for. Tracy?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Neil. I think the buy-in aspect is probably at some points the most difficult for us to achieve, that cultural change and getting people to switch their mindset. And I think that's why in the new planning NPF4 that's just came out, that's why it's important that community wealth building is in there, because it's about getting people to think in a slightly different way. And we have been engaging with, for instance, the Scottish Young Planners and different people to try and raise awareness of what we're trying to do with community wealth building, and how by being a planner, by making planning decisions and within a local authority, you can actually influence what's happening in that local economic activity as well. So it's about what can we get that will actually support and help that local economy, whether it's a rural economy or an urban economy. And it's making planning think slightly differently to what they have done up to now. And there are some good examples, I believe, in North Ayrshire, again, about how planning, procurement, employability and teams all come together to make a collective decision around things. And if we... our colleague Julie has got some more information on that we could possibly share, if that would be helpful.
Okay, listen, thank you very much for that. I've got two more questions. Can I come to Councillor Robb next?
Thank you. I was really interested in what you were saying about the National Investment Bank and credit unions and so on. Obviously, we want to maximise as much as possible money raised in South Lanarkshire, staying in South Lanarkshire. Are there any examples of it, local banks? I know we had Airdrie Savings Bank and so on. What's the picture on local banking now, and is there anything more that can be done there?
It's a really good question, Councillor Rob. And, you know, the short answer in the UK is that the legislation, the banking legislation allows for the setting up of community-type banking, but it's very, very difficult to capitalise, you know, a bank. And that is where it's one of those pieces of legislation that UK government allows for, but without the capital resources put to it, it's difficult to see. It's difficult for these community banks to get up and running. Though we have got the Avon Mutual down in the southwest. There's talk of North West Bank, which initial capitalisation is looking to local authorities to help to put some of the capital in those entities. But you know what it's like, local governments, it's really difficult. So the legislation's there, but it's difficult to enact them because of the lack of resources. You know, in America, land of the free, you've got a range of community local banks, the Bank of South Dakota. In Germany, you've got, I think, around 400 or maybe 200 odd Sparkassen local banks that service local places, that recirculates wealth, you know, lending to local business. They make a buck, it goes back into the coffers and then recirculates round. So it's tricky in the UK, it's tricky in Scotland. I know that North Ayrshire did a little bit of a feasibility study, so it might be worth talking to them, you know, and just see where they got up to with the agenda. But we're at the start of a journey. We need more push on those types of forms, community banks. Credit unions now can lend to business and other forms of enterprise. Credit union movement is quite buoyant in Scotland, and I know that they are keen on, you know, growing their own capital reserves and capacity. Again, the same problem exists. I was talking about community banks, but credit unions wording, I think 5 credit unions pretty decent and trying to move up, you know, grow itself. But, you know, and from a Scottish Government perspective, we kind of aware of these issues, but a lot of it is in the realms of, you know, UK government in terms of what we could push on. And just on SNIB, we've got very positive conversations with SNIB. They're developing their missions, and hopefully you will see some of those missions percolating through the system, and you'll see some funding to community wealth building type of activities. So it's not a really heartily positive answer, Councillor Rob, but I'm just giving you a kind of picture, a sort of a view of the landscape that's there.
Yeah, just to add to that, Neil, if I may, I am about to meet up with the Association for Credit Unions, and one of the things that they want to explore with us is how we can help them to lend more to local businesses. And there is an issue that's coming through in terms of the credit unions, and there are some good examples and some credit unions who actually do lend to businesses, but under the rules that currently apply under the FCA rules, you have to be able to offer certain services to business as well as the lending, and that sometimes is what's actually causing the issue for the credit union, and that they don't have that skill and they don't have that capacity. What we have seen in Renfrewshire is a join-up between Renfrewshire Council and their local credit union, where the credit union provides the finance, but the local authority business advisors, if you like, are the ones providing the advice. So that, again, that's something that we're seeing at the moment, small scale, but it is something that's there. So I will be able to give you an update after my meeting next week with the credit unions as to how far we think we can go with that. But we are definitely pushing at an open door there. They are keen to get involved, but it is about capacity issues, resources, and how we could maybe partner up a little bit, I think, with them to help them do a bit more.
Thank you very much for that. I've got 3 more questioners here. Can I ask if anybody does want to come in, if you can press your request to speak, and I'll try to tie this up and keep to time here. But it's it's not a criticism. This is a really good discussion. I'm looking ahead. Don't worry. Can I come to Andy Aird now from the FSB?
Hey, thanks, Chair. Just on a follow-up on the banking situation, we had a very profitable and energetic Airdrie Savings Bank at one point, but post-2008, the changes to the financial legislation meant that they couldn't even keep up with that. They couldn't employ the staff sufficiently to keep going with the legislation. But that wasn't my original question. I wonder if Neil and Tracy have excellent research, and thanks, that will give us a step up when we come to implement community wealth building. But can you tell us, from your experience, is there any really good ideas or good implementation for getting grassroots feedback on the sort of wish list, and how is that best communicated to local communities? Because I think we're still working at a higher level here. We haven't really got to the grassroots to find out what they really want.
We're in the same order, Tracy, aren't we? I don't know if that's. We'll just keep on. It's a great question, Andy. There is a translation issue here, of how we translate, mid-level economic strategy, policy talk to communities. And I think when you've got, I don't know what stage you're at, but you've got your action plan, I think you need to get out there into the community and explain what this is all about. Yeah, and use as simple as plain language as possible. It's important to engage in that way. In other areas, some of the energy from community wealth building is not coming from local authorities or businesses or public agencies. It's coming from the communities themselves, because they're seeing the existing economic model, if you like, not servicing them. So it's coming more from an activist space. So, for instance, in Chicago, it came from a sense that our land and our property, we've got no say in it, So it came from a disgruntlement with gentrification and the, people coming in, building stuff, and they don't see any of the benefits or any of the jobs. So I think there is something to try and tap into the situation in local places and what they're suffering or what they're getting annoyed at, and linking it back to community wealth building. I mean, town centres are a great example, the decline of the high street, not enough services, community wealth building, more independent shops, more local activity. That can play right into community sort of sentiment, and also it plays into community wealth building. Tracy?
Yeah, and I think in terms of in Scotland, who to talk to, who might actually be able to give you ideas on this, is Perth and Ross Council. Did some really good work where they engaged with their local community to actually ask them what they wanted. So they kind of spoke to them about what we want to do is, when we're putting out contracts, we want to ensure that you're getting as much benefit as possible. What type of thing would you like to see within your locality? What is the thing that is irking you the most, as Neil kind of alluded to, and what can you do about it? What do you think the solution is? And they developed that wish list. Midlothian are looking at it just now as well. Midlothian Council are thinking about how they could do that. And we also, Fife and North Lanarkshire as well, all did it. But there was an element of getting out and speaking with organisations and community groups to find out what exactly they thought their community would need most, and what their community would benefit most from as well.
We have quite a lot of active community groups in the South Lanarkshire area. I'm more concerned about the ones that don't have that type of community activity, because the ones that are asking for it will get it. It's the ones who don't even know it's happening that might miss the boat. And how do we get to them during this process to make sure that we cover absolutely everybody? It's like going back to Councillor Allison's talk about the rural situation. It's not always that information gets fed that distance away, not from a geographical point of view, but just from a communication point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I take that point on board, and I think one of the things that we're actually battling with just now is exactly that, in terms of when we bring forward the consultation that we want to do prior to the legislation. We suspect we'll get the usual suspects, not to be horrible about that, but we suspect we'll get the usual people coming forward and giving their views. And in a way, the way we're trying to make sure we get as many views as possible and as wide as possible is by engaging with a project called Get Heard Scotland, which has been run by the Poverty Alliance. So they have a network of individuals that they work with and grassroots organisations. So in an attempt to get as wide a kind of take on the legislation or legislative proposals that we might want to put forward, we're going to engage with them to try and ensure we can get as many voices heard as possible, for that very reason that you've just mentioned, Andy, about the folk that don't normally engage in this type of process.
Okay. Thanks for that. I did see a hand from Stephen Sweeney, who's from our third sector interface at Vaslan, but it seems to have disappeared. So I was going to say, if Stephen wants to come in, it's just, right, I'm going to bring Stephen in. It was just in the, I didn't want to have missed him. Right, okay, Stephen, we think you're able to contribute just now, but we can't see you. But there you're there.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can
Aye, we
indeed.
hear you, Stephen.
Perfect. That was that little delay again. Hi, folks. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair, and thanks Tracy and Neil for the presentation, which was great. I did put my hand down because Andy's question sort of cut across a little bit what I was going to say, but I think with encouragement, Councillor Fagan, I'll continue anyway. I guess my question was around about our new community planning partnership plan. So we've got a new plan which we're launching next month, which I'm really excited about, that places the community as an equal partner. So I guess I'm very conscious that when we look at things through a community wealth building lens and looking at doing economic development differently, sometimes it can be a little bit top down, you know, but Neil, you've already spoke about some of that kind of grassroots movement. But I guess that my question was round about what advice would you give us as community planning partners in terms of you know, that jargon busting, that getting out and speaking to people with communities, but also supporting communities themselves to play an active part in community wealth building in South Lanarkshire going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. There's a key point I always say. I spoke to the SCVO last week, I think it was, and there's a key point I always make is that this is an economic agenda. It's you know, community wealth building. So this is about what is the economic role for the third sector, you know, in terms of jobs, its turnover, its business, its ownership of property and all that stuff. And collectively, across all the different elements of the third sector, you'll add up to quite a bit, quite a few jobs, and quite a few people know the figures yourself, Stephen. So that's important. How can you do more in the economy? And also the key thing here is to move out of a volunteering, not move out, extend your volunteering community organisation type civic activism role, moving into the world of community enterprise, social enterprise, delivery of goods and services, not necessarily in the public sector, to play into the commercial sector more. That's a kind of key. It's that ladder of expectation and ladder of influence that, you know, you'll clearly need, you know, active citizens, civil society, but community wealth building is interested in the transition from that community cafe that turns into, like, you know, something more commercial and moving up that ladder. That's the kind of thing we're, you know, community wealth building really interested in. So it's an economic agenda, and I think you are a player already. And as a strategy for your own sector, to think, what is our contribution? How can we contribute more? And where is the growth potential in moving into more economic type enterprises?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Appreciate that.
Thanks very much. Oh, sorry, Tracy, in you come. Sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the jargon busting side of things, Stephen, my mum's 72, and she tells me community wealth building just sounds like common sense. And basically what that's about is when I say to my mum, I won't say she's 72 again, she'll probably fall out. But when I say to my mum about, we're looking at how we can make our economies more resilient, how we can use our supply chains better, how we can engage more, how we can make sure people get better wages for the work that they're doing, she says, that's common sense, how are we not already doing it?
Yeah.
So just to add to Neil's point on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you. I'm going to come to a final question, and it is in the room. It's from Councillor Walker.
Hear me, yeah? I think this question is maybe more one for the officers here. I'm not going to cover some of the points that have already been made, but I was wondering, in terms of strengthening the community groups, we do have a lot of active and organised community groups. What the role is maybe for our community empowerment team in that, in terms of making sure it's on people's agenda and that they're able to access resources that are out there, and also who you would see driving it. Would it be the Economic Development Forum across Lanarkshire? Would it be Community and Enterprise Committee? Because what I've kind of gathered is that I think it would be good if at some point there was an actual set of priorities, or a strategy or an implementation plan around community wealth building in terms of maybe areas we were going to target first, and also in relation to planning and the role of developers in terms of community benefits and community assets and the way that they can support local businesses and local employment. We really need to maybe build on that and make as much, because let's face it, they do have a lot of resources that the community can access in terms of using it to build up local employment, local apprentices, and growing your own in terms of youth employment strategies, all of that. But I suppose my key question is, who do you see driving this? Is it the Economic Development Committee? Is it Community and Enterprise? Is it Community and Empowerment? Is it all of them? Thanks.
I think, Councillor Walker, the short answer, it's all of them. It's the culture of the local authority and the wider community planning partnership to nurture third sector growth into the economic realm, if you like. I mean, I'm a big fan of audit, find out what is out there in the third sector and opportunity spotting. Where are the bits of the third sector who could potentially service more demand, who could potentially have got an idea for an enterprise, who are wanting to grow into, grow a property or move into a piece of land and do something more interesting with it. That is economic development territory, and economic development is beyond that. That might not seem as sexy, if I can use that word, or as big scale as big developer moving in, but it is important. Many a muckle makes a mickle. Many a mickle makes a muckle. Many a small thing makes a lot. And all those little bits that's happening in our communities who want to move more into an economic terrain, economic development should be trying to spot them and trying to assist and harness and cajole and nudge and support wherever they can their development and growth. Tracy?
Yeah, I'd agree. And I would agree with you. I think it's all of them, because I do think it's back to that point we made earlier about that cultural change and that change in mindset and everyone thinking about what they can do in order to support economic development locally. And I think equally that idea about spotting that you just said there, Neil, there is something as well about spotting the opportunities for local companies as well. Not necessarily just the third sector, but thinking about our small to medium enterprises, how they might actually be able to come together to win local contracts. And there's a really good example of that in East Ayrshire with Mcenroy Farm, who actually wanted to produce the milk that was supplied to the East Ayrshire schools, and they now do that, but they have other farms that help them actually fulfil that contract, and what they do is provide the pasteurisation of the milk. So what you're actually finding now is that Mcenroy Farm has almost, if you like, set up a bit of a cooperative where they're working with other farms in the locality to actually produce the milk that they need for the contracts. And the bit that I thought was quite nice was that the young people at the school can actually look out at their school buildings and see the cows that are providing the milk that they just drank, which is quite interesting. So when you talk about resilience and smaller supply chains, I don't think you could get much smaller than that. So that's something I think to think about, is that spotting of local opportunity and where local companies could actually benefit and win contracts that could be coming out from the public sector.
Okay, listen, I don't see any more hands. So I'm going to just abuse my position again and ask one sort of final question, do my Columbo routine, but it's come up a few times now. Community empowerment has come up. and rightly we want in building the right mix of enterprises and forms of ownership, we want to be able to develop assets in the community. We want to be able to develop the base in the community to help make this agenda work. And we also want to do it just because it's the right thing to do. In the previous term, there was absolute political consensus in this council. I think there's absolute political consensus in the current council as well around taking forward the community wealth building agenda. But some people struggled with what would I call it? Not an opposition to the community empowerment agenda, but a wariness from oneself, a bit of a nervousness about how community empowerment, your concept of community empowerment, sits alongside this. Because some of us remember David Cameron's Big Society and concepts that to me weren't really necessarily developed in tandem with a wider view about how you restructure local economies, or at least not in the direction that we are necessarily talking about today. I'm just wondering, when we talk about community empowerment from a community wealth building perspective, what do we mean? And what do the Scottish Government mean? Because to me, we're building capacity. What we're not doing is deliberately undermining the local state. And I'm just wondering if what is it that the Scottish Government mean when they talk about community empowerment?
I'll just speak from community wealth building and what it is as a concept, and what it's about. Community empowerment, right? Well, community wealth building is not about divesting public services or hollowing out the local state to community to deliver services on the cheap. Yeah, it's an economic reform agenda, and it's actually about reducing demand in the first place, by giving people more access to wealth and opportunity. So there is interpretations of community wealth, maybe not in Scotland, but elsewhere. There is more of a community power, big society feel about it, particularly in England. But that is not the interpretation of Scotland, and it's not really the true view of what community wealth building is all about. It's not part of a, hollowing out the local state, low tax, society, and community wealth is like divesting of it in the community. It's not that at all. And community empowerment in Scotland is about empowering communities to play a deeper and more stronger role within an economy for economic, social, and ecological justice. It's not about that whole hollowing out state agenda. Sorry, I'm warbling on, but you get the drift. Sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's about that, and I can never say this word, so bear with me, democratisation of our economy. I managed to get it out. So that's what it's about. It's about people feeling that they have a bit more control over it and have a more active role in it and an active part to play, rather than, as Neil mentioned, that kind of big society idea where you third sector and everybody else will deliver the services that currently our public services do.
No, thank you for that. I think that's useful to have on the record, and it's something we need to be vigilant about as we take it forward. But listen, that's been a brilliant session, so thank you both. I really appreciated that. Thank you to everyone that contributed and asked questions. Well, we got on with the rest of the business today. I'm sure you've got plenty of other things to be getting on with. So just from me and from everyone in the room here, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Drop that out. Okay, folks, thank you very much for that. I'm going to come now to item 4, which is the local spend update, and I'm going to ask Craig Ferguson to speak to the report. Craig.
The purpose of the report is to update the Commission on the progress made in relation to analysing local spend and also identifying further opportunities to increase those current levels. In terms of background to the report, in my previous report to the Commission on the 7th of February provide performance information on levels of local spend and a geographic analysis for financial year 2021 and also a further analysis. The report also flagged up a number of actions to take forward to further understand the factors that influence the level of local spend and also identify further opportunities. 3.2 just notes what those individual actions were, including analysis of the mix of South Lanarkshire businesses and how it compares to those in North Lanarkshire, and also further analysis of council spend across 5 geographical areas. Moving on to 3.3, it provides a summary of the council's performance since 2016-17 in relation to local spend, and it compares that to the Scottish average. For financial year 21-22, we confirm now that performance is more or less back to the levels we've seen prior to the COVID health pandemic. Particularly seen spend within construction, furniture and transport sectors increase back to pre-COVID levels. Section 4 of the report provides analysis in relation to South Lanarkshire businesses with a particular focus on the construction sector. It views from one area, given the fairly recent changes in our approach to quick quote, that should allow more opportunities for local businesses to win contracts from council services. The data itself focuses on the enterprise count data for 2021 and essentially provides some comparison information over small, medium and large construction companies between North and South Lanarkshire. It essentially provides a backdrop to help explain potentially the reasons as to why obviously the performance figures for South Lanarkshire appear to be lower than those equivalent for North. You can see in relation to medium and large companies, there's quite a marked difference in terms of the number of construction companies in operation. In terms of the reasons for that, that's largely believed to be attributable to the industrial land supply within North Lanarkshire compared to the South Lanarkshire, which obviously is a higher proportion, a higher number of small companies. Certainly what we're seeing through further investigation is there are fairly low numbers of South Lanarkshire construction trades registered with Public Contracts Scotland. Therefore, they're not actively engaged in public sector procurement, even out with what South Lanarkshire puts through for tendering opportunities. That certainly may be in part due to there being fewer medium and large companies within South Lanarkshire in the construction field that obviously would require the necessary resources to participate in public sector procurement, or it could also be they don't provide the type and scale of services required by the council. And certainly informal feedback through the sector tells that the preferred route to gaining new business for small companies, it tends to be via business-to-business referral and also networking opportunities. And of course, the perceived complexity of public sector procurement and obviously the resources required to participate in tendering exercises may well be deterring those same small businesses and may of course lack the sufficient admin support to undertake the work that's necessary. And certainly in relation to obviously trying to improve that situation, further engagement, further promotion of free to access support, and particularly through the supplier development programme, it will be a key feature going forward. Section 5 of the report provides further analysis of council spend, and it confirms that 35% within Pan Lanarkshire, with 64% overall within Scotland. The council's high spend areas are not surprisingly within social care and construction, which together represent over 50% of our procured spend for 2021-22. Social care itself accounts for just under 109 million, or 31% of our council spend, albeit only 30% of that is with local enterprises. Nonetheless, though, it's worth recognising just the important role that spend has got in supporting local employment at living wage level across the South Lanarkshire area. In terms of construction, just under £90 million of spend each year. That represents about 17% of it being local, and there's certainly higher levels retained within the Glasgow City region overall, being at 75%. We also recognise in the report the benefits of subcontracting opportunities, and you'll see that at 5.23, whereby there's £76 million of expenditure goes through Hub South West to South Lanarkshire companies in the broadest sense, offering a valuable contribution to the local economy. Moving on to 5.3 within the report, this kind of further breaks down for the first time that South Lanarkshire spend over localities. It's no surprise that 70% of local spend is with the larger and industrial areas of Hamilton, East Kilbride and Blantyre. In spend out with Scotland, total 126 million, of which 65% was spent in the south of England or London. In the highest categories of spend there were financial services, namely the PPP contract, some social care companies based south of the border, waste and also ICT. The Grow Local report provides management information to help inform initiatives to support the development of supply chain activity and encourage local companies to bid for increased share of the Council's procurement spend. And as active discussion is taking place with colleagues, particularly within the roads and transportation and housing technical services, to identify opportunities presented from the review of that management information that should allow additional tendering opportunities to be presented on a more local basis. And just to promote that activity, there's a series of buyer and contractor engagement events will take place to match forthcoming tender opportunities with local contractors. We've previously recognised there's an opportunity to make sure we secure the benefits of subcontracting spend within South Lanarkshire businesses. We're making a change to how we contract, effectively making that a requirement going forward to allow this information to be gathered and therefore captured for future reports. Section 8 of the report identifies some several actions coming from the report with the main objective of increasing local spend levels and the capturing of spend information. That includes further engagement and promotion through supplier development programme and economic development, and also the promotion of collaborative opportunities, particularly those provided by Hub South West. I can refer committee back to the recommendations and ask that the content of the report is noted and the next steps as outlined in section 8 are noted also. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. If anyone has any questions, could I ask you to press your button just now? I'm going to come to Kirsten Robb. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for the report, really useful. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Under 5.4, obviously the PPP contract has resulted in a vast wealth disappearing out of South Lanarkshire and out of South Lanarkshire's services. What's the plan? When are those contracts up, and what happens after the end of those contracts? Do we own them? Do we need to buy them out just so we can keep more money in the South Lanarkshire economy? That's the first question. The next one, hopefully a bit simpler than that, is under 11.1, is to just ask for a revised approach on how to measure sustainability in contracts. Just an update on that be reported to a future meeting, please.
Okay, I'm going to... I think we can get a revised approach, but I think Paul Manning, wanted to pick up the question about PPP.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Robb. In terms of the PPP contracts, I think I'm right in saying by 2038, right, those have come to an end. So they were framed around a 30-year contract. Now, at that point, the schools revert to council ownership. Right, so that's, I suppose, as much as I can say at this point on that. The other thing that maybe just draw to your attention is we have, I think I referred to this in a report that we took to Council back in June. We are looking at ways of changing how we account for those PPP contracts, which means that we're allowed to account for it across the life of the asset, so that the life of the asset will be longer than 30 years. Right? It's going to be closer to 50 odd years. So we'll be able to stretch the costs out for longer. Now that is different, right, to paying a PPP provider. So I'm probably not adding anything to the conversation beginning to this, but it's just to say that that's another feature of PPP that you're likely to see put across your desk across the next year or so. Thanks, Councillor Robb.
The next question I have is Robert Brown. Robert.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It is quite useful and very interesting. I wanted to ask, though, about the actual breakdown across the localities, because it was mentioned that the Hamilton East Kilbride areas and Blantyre took a lot of the spend because of the industrial estates and things like that. I was struck, though, by the relatively low level at 5% of the Cambuslang and Rutherglen areas, which also have industrial estates and Clyde Gateway and various other things operating there. Is it below its likely percentage for South Lanarkshire for the Rotherham Cambuslang bit? Is there anything we could be doing about it? Are we maybe not giving as much attention to that as we should do? Are there any issues arising from that which are worth looking at? It's a very interesting report. And I think what did come out of it generally was the uncertainty of some of the statistics. For example, the measurement of the care home stuff is a bit subject to qualification. Is it intended to kind of alter the definitions in any way as we go forward? That's the second question. Thank you.
Right. Craig?
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of your point on, is there almost like a kind of target percentage? To the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing. What we can certainly do is drill down further within these spend figures to further identify the types of spend that are taking place. So essentially, find further analysis on that kind of commodity structure. I think that would require a further exercise with colleagues in economic development to then kind of correlate that to the businesses that are there and what potentially the opportunities there in relation to further development. In relation to the definition of local spend, that's essentially a national definition that's applied. All councils follow it. But what we're trying to recognise here is that the benefits of how the council spends in a procurement sense does go beyond that is reported within that local performance indicator. Therefore, we do believe there's merit identifying that spend that takes place within the area that does support employment, particularly around the social care example I gave during the presentation of the report. So hopefully that explains a little bit of the background around the kind of limited scope we have to change the definition as such. Thank you.
Just following on that, Chair, briefly, if I might. I mean, just going forward, I don't want to obviously get extra work that's going to be too complicated, but just keep an eye on this Rotherham Cambuslang thing, if you will, because it does seem to me there are some issues arising out of that we might want to have a look at. And it may be that there are things like the placing of networking arrangements and things like this that have some implications for what we do there too.
Okay, thanks. I think that is indeed something we should keep an eye on. And I just wanted a couple of comments. Oh, sorry, we have Josephine, I think, wants to come in this point. Josephine?
Down information to help with the analysis, and also 4.8 mentions about small businesses lack of admin support, and we talked about that in terms of the credit union discussion point as well, and whether there was something that can be done to look at that so there's more detailed data available, and then more support and encouragement for those small businesses to be able to use that data to make applications. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Josephine. I think with the delay we missed the very start of what you were saying, but we got your reference there at the end. I just wanted to say from my own point of view, the kind of next steps in section 7 as well also could have set out where we, further work to be done with subcontractors to dig down into where some of the subcontracted spend is going. I think we are aware, we've been aware for some time that some of these big contracts where a firm might be headquartered out with South Lanarkshire, a lot of the real expenditure that comes out of it is money getting spent in the real economy here. So we need to get a better understanding of where that is. And I just wanted to, before we leave this item, just say myself at the Lanarkshire Business Awards on Friday night, I actually spoke to a number of businesses, local businesses in that construction sector. It's mentioned in the report the work that's been done with to try and build a network that can approach the South West hub to try and access some opportunities for local construction firms. And I know that the economic development team in the council have been important to that, and Elliot Jordan's team have been important to that. So I just think it's worth mentioning that today as well. It is an area that we know we have more to do, but it is an area that is being we are progressing with. If there are no other questions, can I come now to item 5, which is community wish lists, and can I ask Rhonda Leith to speak to the report? Rhonda.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think you can hear me now, yeah?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Thank you. So this is probably quite a timely report in view of some of the conversation with Tracy and Neil earlier. And it's looking at the development of the community wish list approach in South Lanarkshire, which Tracy had mentioned in some other areas. So the idea here is that we already have community benefits in place around procurement, where we're really looking at the wider social benefit from the contract and making sure that that's maximised for people living in South Lanarkshire. So some good examples of that would be around training and employability opportunities, which are already in place and that work's happening. The idea of the community wish list is that the communities themselves are able to put forward what they need and what they would want to see, and suppliers are then able to engage that within their contracts and say that they will help to meet those needs within communities. So it's really about looking at a more bottom-up way of delivering community benefits while still retaining all of the good activity that's happening, but making sure that they're linked directly into what communities need. Been doing some work along with Glasgow City Region, who also deliver community benefits through their spend as well, and trying to make sure that that alignment becomes tighter with our communities. So as part of this, the City Region are developing a regional approach, which will basically be an interface online, where each local authority will have its own landing page and identity, but a shared backroom service there. And that's being designed at the moment and being worked on through City Deal, and it's expected to be in place for the kind of end of 2022. Within the council, we've had some investment funding which has enabled us to support a fixed term post for half-time for an officer. So we now have somebody in that post who started very recently in the last few weeks. And their job is, Tracy spoke about translation between communities and organisations about community wealth building. So their job really is to think about how do we support groups, how do we translate this opportunity to them in ways that are meaningful, help them to identify their wishes and get them uploaded onto that system so they can take advantage of it. And you'll also see in 4.2 as well, we're aware that there are some communities who will be really well established and very much able to take advantage of the opportunity, and others who are less likely to do so. So the post holder will be looking to engage with those communities and support them to make sure that they also get the advantages, the opportunities that are there. Obviously, this is a new emerging agenda, and there's quite a lot of work that's being done in the background, and that's being undertaken at the moment. Alongside that, there's also a new community benefits officer post in the procurement service who will look at working with maximising the community benefit outcomes across the council and the City Deal, and monitoring and managing how those are delivered. So they'll work very closely with the community wish list officer as they go forward. Thinking about partners and other anchor organisations as well, the NHS across Scotland already has their own portal, a community benefit gateway in place, and that already allows communities to put forward their wishes and their needs to link into NHS procurement. So through the community wish list officer, again, we'll be able to promote that locally and make sure that our communities understand the opportunity there. And likewise, if there's other partners or anchor organisations locally who are looking at delivering community benefits, we can also help to promote them so that opportunity is available to our partners as well. And obviously the person's now in post, so they're beginning to engage with, first of all, officers and partners, and thinking about how do we translate this to communities, what would communities want, and how do we start to speak to them about getting the wish list system up and running. As part of that, then there'll be a process that will be agreed, which will be clear, with markets and promotional tools to help publicise what's available, and we will make sure that they are shared with all of our partners as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Rhonda. Can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I don't have any. I do. I have Josephine is looking to come in here. Josephine.
Thank you. Thanks, Rhonda. That was very helpful. And I think, as you've said, it's a great opportunity for the community engagement and empowerment in terms of the wish list. And I think 4.4 covered partly what I was thinking around some communities being better able to represent in the wish list. And I note number 10 around equality impact assessment and consultation arrangements. You've noted that there is no plan, or that's not going to be undertaken. I just wondered about some maybe groups or larger communities or BAME groups or other types of groups or communities where how would we know they're well represented or encouraged to represent in that wish list? Thank you.
Rhonda, do you want to pick that up?
Certainly, thanks very much. So a very good question, Josephine, and it's one that is at the front of our minds. When we're thinking about the different types of communities that we work with, we know there's some geographical communities who may be less advantaged, and also there's particular communities of interest and groups within those communities too. So although at the moment there's not plans to undertake a full equalities assessment and an impact assessment around that, we will be making sure that we have an eye to that and looking at the groups that we're talking to and are coming forward, engaging with our partners like yourselves and Health Improvement, who have links to many of those groups, and making sure that the information is being spread as widely and as appropriately as possible. Part of the monitoring will then look at where are the groups who are putting forward wishes as we go forward, to make sure that we are getting that representative spread across the area, both geographically and in terms of the communities of interest too.
Thanks for that, Rhonda. I don't see any other questions. This is just a personal opinion. I think the concept is sound. I think the concept actually addresses a long-standing need to bring some transparency actually to community benefits, and also to join them up with needs in the community. I really don't like the term community wish list. I think it sounds a bit Care Bear for me, but if that's the parlance that is used, if that's the term that's used, we'll have to run with it. But if that's not the term that's used, and we think it might be the best way of helping communities understand what we're trying to address, if there is another way of phrasing it that helps engage with the community, then maybe there's a conversation that could happen with our head of communications, and just to make sure we're getting the comms around it. And good luck to the new community wish list officer. Okay, right. Okay. Can I come now to item 6, which is the Community Wealth Building Risk Register, and can I ask Craig Ferguson to pick that one up?
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides an update to the Commission on the risk register. This was developed and approved by the Commission in October last year, with risks recorded against each of the 5 pillars noted within the strategy. And essentially, the purpose of the register is to ensure the Commission is fully aware of the strategic risks that apply. They have been prioritised, and that controls are in place to eliminate or minimise the potential impact. Section 4 provides an update in respect to the register itself, having been reviewed. The risk plan also having been reviewed following consultation with the Community Wealth Building lead officers, and that work was completed in July. So the updated risk register is attached as Appendix 1 to the report, and as the Chair alluded to earlier in the meeting, a new overarching risk has been added with a residual score of 20, and that's noted at 4.2, and refers to the impact of rising energy prices, inflation, and interest rates adversely impacting the delivery of the objectives of the strategy, and that impact may of course be exacerbated by a recession. There's 5 control measures identified, including business support for local businesses and also cost of living support to residents. A new control action has also been added to the action plan, and that is to monitor the availability of support from government, just recognising the significant backdrop to the challenges that have been faced just now. Some of the other key risks are also summarised in the report at 4.4. Draw attention to the scope to increase spend local business and social enterprises is limited due to a lack of capacity and their ability to meet council requirements, and also town centre decline, resulting in a reduction in footfall and therefore consequential spend within the local economy. Section 5 provides an update in respect of the risk control actions, covering the 22 in total listed. In progress with completion of the control actions is monitored by the Community Wealth Building Group. If I can refer the Commission back to the recommendations, the content of the risk register is noted, and so too is the progress and delivery of the risk control action plan. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions in this report? There are, Andy Eard.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Craig. Very complete report, as usual. Just on 4.4, coming back to procurement, I know that you're saying the scope and the capacity of local business isn't there. I'm not sure we've actually delved into that yet in the greatest possible way, and it should be tied into some kind of activity with the buying departments, just to change the culture. It's the only way we're actually going to get buy-in or engagement with local businesses if we change their attitudes. The local businesses' attitude at the moment, a lot of them don't see it as an opportunity because it's a lot of effort for little reward at times. So we need to change that. We need to have a paradigm shift there to get them away from that. So there's a lot of work has to be done. And I know we've got the local help of the supplier development programme, but there needs to be an internal review of that from the council's point of view, from the buying departments. That will give you a bigger capacity, rest assured.
Craig, do you want to pick?
Obviously, be aware of the changes we made to our quick quote arrangements, and certainly that's a big area of focus for a number of the buying departments, as you refer to, particularly housing, technical and also roads. And you'll see in the next report in relation to the action plan for this year, there is a commitment to come back to the Commission by December with an update on the progress we're making in respect to the new quick hook arrangements and the successes and lessons learned from the changes we've made so far. You'll also be aware, Andy, there is a questionnaire out just now to local businesses, focusing very much on procurement, gathering information, the perceived barriers, and essentially trying to get information on the appetite that is there across local businesses to engage in public sector procurement. So I think obviously the results of that questionnaire will be some interesting reading and will inform our plans going forward. Thanks.
Right, thanks for that. And I think the fundamental shift that we're trying to get out of this, well, lots of shifts we have to get out of this, but this one we have to see our procurement function as part of the wealth building process. That's the strong message that's come out of the earlier items as well as Andy's contribution. Can I ask, if there are no further questions, can we agree that report and move on to the next item, which is item 7, which is the Community Wealth Building Action Plan. It's a refresh, and can I ask Neil Reid to speak to the report?
Thank you, Chair. So at the last meeting of the Commission, when we reported the performance at Q4, we undertook to refresh the action plan and bring it back to you for approval, and that's what this report does. So the lead officers for Community Wealth Building have reviewed the pillars and the actions under the pillars, taken out the old ones, adding new wording where required, and checking that they are still fit for purpose. Sorry, can everyone hear okay? So that's the action plan you have before you. It's by no means a complete rewrite of the action plan. We're essentially checking that the actions that are there are still fit for purpose. You will see new actions throughout the plan. Craig's just referred to one there. So it's there at Appendix 1 for you. And as with the previous action plan, we will come back to the Commission at Q2 and Q4 with updates on the progress against these actions, and essentially looking for you to approve that action plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I throw this one out for any questions or contributions, and can I come to Councillor Walker?
the contribution I was sort of made earlier on around community benefits rather, and ensuring contractors and procurement practices deliver the maximum there. So I mean, obviously that a lot of that is actually covered in the action plan, but it'd probably be useful, yeah, maybe to have another column in it identifying specifically, you know, who's actually taking that forward. You know, is it, you know, community enterprises, is it planning committee that are, you know, obviously involved in negotiating contracts, and and how the community are going to be involved in that as well. That would be really useful. Thank you.
Thanks. So just a slight technical hiccup. I had the next question will be Kirsten Robb. I've just deleted you from my list here, but we will come back to you. So does somebody want to pick up that question there about a column on who would be taking forward the actions? Neil or... Yeah, Neil?
Yeah, so that's not visible here in this version of it, just I think to make it as concise as possible. But there's a working document behind the scenes where we do have departments and officers responsible. It doesn't admittedly include wider structures, if you like committees or community organisations, but that level of detail could be supplied if necessary.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to come now to Kirsten Robb and then Alec Allison. Kirsten.
Thank you. Yep, really interesting. Wanted to ask a couple of things. The first is on the land and property. The last meeting, which I missed, Council kindly came back with an answer about how Council's using its land and buildings to generate renewables, and you replied that there's further work underway on that to look at how you can use district heating and wind turbines and so on. It was just to ask that would be reflected in the action plan so we don't lose that good work and we build on it. That's the first bit. Great stuff. And the second one, we've talked a bit about banking. Until there's kind of local banks, I wanted to ask about how the council ensures that its investments and its common good funds are invested in banks where we ensure that those banks back community wealth building and sustainability principles. And it was just to ask if more information could be brought back on how our banks, that the council banks with, are invested in those community wealth building and sustainability principles.
Okay, so there's 2 points there. So the first one was about, can we have an action that reflects those issues that were raised, which I think are, in fairness, they're reflected in, say, the council priorities document and other documents. Is that something that we could include? And I'll bring in I think Tom Little on that one. And the second question, I'm looking for I think we're going to come to Jackie Taylor in response to that second question. So come to Tom Little in the first instance.
I'll be brief because it's not my area, as you know, Councillor Robb. But yes, we can. We haven't previously had some of the items you were talking about in this action plan because they are accounted for and reported on elsewhere through the asset management planning and climate change areas. So, but we can certainly look at including them in this action plan going forward too.
Okay, thanks for that, Tom. And Jackie, do you want to pick up the second part of that?
Thanks. You mentioned there about the banks that we use to deposit our funds. They will have their own sustainable investment policies. And I think what you're looking for is any specific references within those to community wealth building and how they invest. So what I can do is I can take that back to our bank and see if they can provide a response for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I come now to Alec Allison?
Thanks, Chair. Last item, part of the issues we see is the restrictions that perhaps procurement has in allowing SMEs to be involved in purchasing. And I know at item 9 here it says to review the procurement practices to deliver more local spend where possible, which sounds fine, but when you then look at the actions, there's nothing really there that I think is going to be effective in being able to reevaluate what our rules and practices are to try and make these contracts more appealing or SMEs more able to facilitate these contracts? Should we not strengthen the actions that we need to take under 9 to allow that to happen?
I think Craig, I'm going to ask Craig Ferguson to pick that up.
Thank you, Councillor. I would say, going back to autumn last year, in the report we took to the Executive Committee, obviously sought approval for changes to our quick quote arrangements. And that essentially, in a nutshell, is the single most significant action we can take in terms of reviewing how we procure. So much of our procurement activity obviously is covered by legislation and statute. And effectively, we only get a little bit of flexibility for what's termed non-regulated procurement, which is procurement via contracts below a certain value, which is below 50,000 for supplies and services and below £2 million for works contracts. And that's why Section 9 does refer obviously to providing an update in relation to the progress we're making in the operation of the new quick quote arrangements. But also goes on to acknowledge about reviewing the contract evaluation criteria for regulated spend. So that can bring other aspects such as community benefits, the likelihood of companies using other local companies as part of that supply chain and effectively applying a level of reward to that approach. I would say as a kind of broader point, what we're trying to balance here in terms of how we score tenders and award contracts very much brings together a number of almost kind of competing fractions here, where the core purpose of a lot of our contracts is to deliver, for example, a new carriageway, a new housing project, for example. So in terms of that, the way in which we evaluate contracts, a lot of the award criteria is very much pointed towards that technical content of a bid from a would-be contractor to make sure they can actually deliver the kind of core fundamentals. What we're then doing is adding in some additional value areas, particularly around community wealth building, to try and get as much as we possibly can. But there's no doubt there is that balancing act between the technical aspects of a bid, the price elements, but also bringing those other areas where we're trying to use that power of procurement to get even more value and more local benefit for communities. I think Section 9 does explain, in the widest sense, how we can review procurement practices. It's acknowledging the changes we've made in respect of quick quote, and it's on, again, to look at as well what else we can do in relation to valuation criteria for regulated spend. And also as well, the last point there is around looking at local contract opportunities where viable local markets exist based upon the changes to standing orders and also the valuation criteria. So we can incentivise local subcontracting opportunities, for example. That too can feed in to how we actually award and evaluate contracts. I'm happy to take on any kind of individual points that you'd recommend. I think the kind of broader point here is one that just reflects the extent to which procurement activity is regulated in Scotland. And going back earlier to the presentations we had from Neil, that did allude to potentially looking at legislative changes that could give public bodies more flexibility to generate greater benefit for local communities, and potentially procurement could be one of them.
Can I know Andy Aird wants something. I could tell Andy Aird would want to come in on that item, but see before we do, I think a lot of the action points, I suppose, they relate to the contract that we've already agreed that we want to put out and how we evaluate it and the thresholds, and it's all positive. It is. They were some of the early wins we identified in taking forward the community wealth building agenda. See, before we get to that stage, and this is an area that I just throw out for some genuine sort of consideration and feedback here, but when we actually look at the size of the contracts we're putting out into the market, is that an area that we have considered what the how do I put it, the potential to attract actually bids from within the local economy or to help build some resilience in the local economy? I think the evaluation of the contracts and the measures that are set out, I think we are making progress on. I think there's in a way, I think what Councillor Allison sitting on is maybe a separate issue about before we get to that stage, is there more we can do in terms of what we procure for? I'll just throw that out to see if, and to treat this commission in the way it's intended. It's not a committee, it's a commission. So if that's an idea to throw out, see what kind of reaction it gets from yourselves.
Okay, so listen, fully understand where you're coming from, Councillor Fagan and Councillor Allison as well. So one of the things that we're mindful of, right, where it's possible, how do we bundle up contracts? So that's something that we undertook when we put together the community wealth building strategy to look at. There is reference in here, right, to that sort of activity. If you think it would benefit from being bolstered, we can take this away and have a look at it as one of the actions from the meeting. But where it's possible, if we can package things in a way that makes it more amenable to local business bidding, right, then through the procurement team, we've picked that up as an action, right, and we're looking to do that wherever possible. There might be some situations, so Craig described, the construction of a road or, for example, a bridge, right, where it might not bend its, right, it might not, perhaps not the best, right, it might not lend itself to being split up between a number of smaller jobs, right, but where we can, we're looking to do that. So thanks, Councillor.
Thanks for that. Can I bring in Andy Aird now on that point?
Thanks, Chair. I don't think we should underestimate the progress that South Lanarkshire has actually made when you look back at the figures that Craig's put together. And I'm sure the enterprise officers are fed up listening to me talking about procurement and the percentages. And yes, trying to defend the percentages is difficult, but when you look at 13.5% progressing to where we are in what has been quite a difficult economy, that's good progress. It's probably more than any other local authority in Scotland. So that you have to be complimented for that. And I don't think in Section 9 it really reflects all of the activity, which is why I had asked the earlier question that I asked, so that I could get the research that's actually been done and the enterprise officers' activity on the ground, trying to encourage local businesses such as Stephen Keaton and the rest of his team, really doing a lot of work. I'm networking with local businesses every week, and I see the activity that's going on. And even at the Excellence Awards, there was some activity going on, so they were even working then. So I appreciate that, and I think that 9 doesn't reflect all the activity. It's you could have 3 more pages in there if you try to get the actual real content of the activity in there. But I think going back to my first intonation was about it's the buyers that need to come to the party in a much bigger way than they are. And I think the work that's going on at the moment to get us where we are and to progress it is ideal. And coming from me, that's great praise, rest assured. The progress is great, so I appreciate it and appreciate the work that's going into it at the moment. And what Councillor Brown was saying earlier is reflecting of that as well. He was talking about the Rutherglen area, but it's very difficult and very dangerous to take 1 year spend when you come to things like procurement, because big contracts can really undermine that. It's the trend you're more looking at than just the singular, the year spend, if that is a year spend, which I think it is.
So thanks everybody for those contributions. There's a few points that we're going to take out of that paper. Are there any other points that anyone wishes to make? Yeah, Andy?
Chair, just to follow up on that, the business organisations have been working for quite some time on the legislation with central governments, because that's where the real issue lies as far as the movements of the 50,000 and the 2 million and how that's spread out, and the actual tactics that are involved in tendering. So that work has been done. A lot of it stemmed from the European sort of competitive rules and regulations, which we're not quite as far under as we used to be. So there should be some legislation coming out, hopefully soon, that will help the local authorities spend their money more efficiently.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands or points. There's a few points to take out of that. Can I ask that we agree the report? I see, and move on to the next item. which is community wealth building, town centres, and can I ask Ian Ross to speak to this report?
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, this is the report that was promised at the last meeting. Steve Keating had given a verbal update on town centre activity, and this report just tries to capture the work that we are currently doing and how that ties into community wealth building and how we propose to continue that work. At section 3, I've just given a very brief background as to some of the challenges town centres face, which I'm sure everybody is very familiar with, so I'll not dwell on that too much and try and focus on a bit more of the positive side of things. But noting that town centres play a huge role in our communities, from the community's point of view, from businesses' point of view, for jobs, everything that people will know about. So their role is still enormous going forward. At section 4, I've just tried to pick out some of the activity that we in economic development are involved in. At Appendix 1 and 2, there is a more detailed list of some of the projects we're delivering under the town centre funding that was available to us and the place-based investment funding that's been made available to us. And I hadn't intended to spend any time on any particular project, although in light of some of the earlier discussions, I just wanted to pick out the first two, Carnwath and Forth, just in the sense that it hopefully illustrates some of the efforts that our team are making to engage with the communities. We are having some success. We hope there will be more, but hopefully that list of projects gives some illustration that the reach across larger, smaller, rural, urban communities is being achieved to a greater or lesser extent, and that's what we hope to build on. We got confirmation this morning that Carnwath project has got through to the second stage of the Regeneration Capital Grant application process. So again, hopefully supporting that project early is showing through the community wealth building process that putting in the funding early is allowing other funding to come forward and success to be brought forward. At section 5, just a very brief illustration of how each of the pillars under community wealth building are delivered and influenced under town centre activity. And again, I don't propose to dwell on any individual aspect of that. At section 6, just looking at a bit more of the strategic approach to that, so the Scottish Government, working with Stirling University last year, did a refresh of the Town Centre Action Plan, and that is a kind of overarching approach that we use as a guide to the Town Centre strategic approach. At 6.2, we've noted that we've delivered a number of local town centre action plans, some of which are due for refresh, some of which will be coming to committee for hopefully approval in the near future. And it's been mentioned already about the connections that town centres have with the community plan, community wealth building strategies and wider town centre activity. We in economic development have also commissioned 2 significant pieces of work recently, or within the last few months, just to try to capture that strategic piece on town centres. And you'll see at 6.4 the town centre visioning, which is an overarching strategic approach to the town centres, so that we can understand how our towns, or what the future for each of the town centres are, and each of the communities can have a better understanding of how we see that and how they feed into that as we move forward. And the transition to net zero, town centres are obviously major contributors towards carbon emissions, and working with partnership with colleagues all across a range of services, we're exploring how we can work in town centres as an entity, working with the businesses, the communities, transport, all different sectors, just to see how we can bring improvements to that. We're also looking with planning and other colleagues around how we can bring forward development in a an easier way. So, for example, one of the key things within town centre strategies is increasing town centre living, and that's not always easily delivered within the confines of a town centre. It may be a historic building, it may be lack of outside space or amenity space. There are a range of aspects that can cause barriers to that, but we're having very, very constructive discussions with colleagues about how we get beyond that. So just looking at Section 7, there are a number of areas where we're continuing to explore and deliver. Touched on the town centre strategies. As I say, we've got 4 in place already. We're due to bring the Lanarkshire strategy to committee before the end of the year. We have continued funding available to us. As I've mentioned, we've had the town centre funding, and we're in year 2 of a 5-year programme of place-based investment programme, which is not limited to town centres, but is often heavily focused around that. We engage, and again, just touching on some of the points we made earlier, we working with partners across the council, the community engagement team in particular. We are doing what we can to engage with the relevant groups within each of the towns and town centres, and we think we are making good headway in that, but are always keen to speak to others with ideas around the town centres. And at 7.4, we touched on the Inside Out app, and I know that there was a question raised at the last meeting about the rollout of that. It's at different stages across the different towns, just with the very nature of it. It's intended to be a tool for the communities and the businesses within the towns to use to their own benefit. And again, it comes down to some of the capacity issues that have been touched on previously. In some of the towns with more active business improvement districts, for example, the delivery of that is slightly easier than in some of the other towns. But we've engaged with Andy through FSB, and he's kindly agreed to make his members aware of that. I think Victoria had spoken to you about that in the past, Andy. So hopefully we'll get that up and running, and we've got a bit of resource that we'll put into marketing that moving forward. Finally, sorry, at 7.5, we've just launched, in partnership with NHS colleagues, the Shaping Places for Wellbeing initiative in Rutherglen. When I say just launched, we've had one meeting, an extremely positive meeting with ourselves, NHS colleagues, the Improvement Service and Third Sector colleagues. And I think that could be a really exciting structure and initiative moving forward for our town centres. With your indulgence, Chair, just one area which is not in the report, but we've mentioned a lot about banking today, and just wanted to reference some of the good work that the communities in Cambuslang and Carluke have done. And if you maybe pick up on the BBC, among other news sites, about banking hubs that are coming to these communities. They don't necessarily offer the breadth of service that I think we're alluding to at this meeting, but at least there is a positive move in the banking sector, and maybe just tying some of these initiatives together with the credit unions that have been mentioned today maybe gives us avenues and opportunities to explore. So with that, Chair, I'll just go back to the recommendation in terms of just noting the content of the report, and through you, Chair, happy to take any questions people may have.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. Can I ask if there are any questions in this report? I'm very aware of time and that there's one more item, so if I can take Alec Allison.
Very quick, it's not a question, Mr Chairman, it's just to thank officers for all the support they've given the Carmarthen community in developing their project. It's in my ward. Transformational is often overused, but I think this case it will be for the town and how it develops. So it's just to thank them very much for the work they have put in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Allison, and I'm sure we all agree with your sentiments. Can I ask Robert Brown?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think, first of all, it's a very good report with a lot of interesting material in it. Can I ask two quick points, if I may? First of all, is it intended to have, at the end of the day, strategies of some sort for the major conurbations across South Lanarkshire? So I feel like there's a vision that we talked about before for each of them. And secondly, are we able to bear in mind right across the council's work in this that increasing the footfall, using council resources and buildings in the town centres is itself something which contributes towards footfall, and are we able to make sure that that's actually looked at by all relevant agencies, including not least the Leisure Trust, which has got more probably buildings and developments across South Lanarkshire than many. It's the footfall is the key thing here, isn't it? Either nighttime or daytime stuff.
Okay, Ian, do you want to pick that up?
Yep. In terms of the strategies, yes, although I would caveat that by the overarching vision document that I mentioned that is being prepared will capture a significant amount of that work. And therefore, it may be that we move towards that. The slight hesitation is that because we're midway through that process, it's still evolving. We have in 4 towns. We have when we look at some of the other towns, and East Kilbride's maybe an example. It's a different dynamic, being a completely privately owned town, and therefore the way we work in partnership with the owners there is a bit contrasted to that which we might in a more traditional town centre, if I could call it that. So whether there are individual strategies for all town centres, probably not, but through the visions document we would expect that all towns would know and understand what the council's approach and strategies towards their town is, having had a consultative approach with them. In terms of the council services, I suppose more broadly, Town Centre First is a strategy that the council has been bought into for a number of years. There are also obviously some competing challenges and priorities in terms of rationalising the council estate and the way in which the public and customers use our services, and banks are perhaps an illustration of that. So anecdotally, 10 years ago, if we were having this conversation, we would be talking about diversification of use and increasing the reasons that people come to towns, and that would be around council services and banks and services such as that, but people are increasingly shifting online. So it's about how we maximise the reasons for people to come to town centres, increase their dwell time there, and support the businesses that are within those town centres. Probably the challenge is that each of the town centres have similar challenges, but unique and individual solutions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. If there are no other questions, can I ask that we agree the report, move on to the next item. And the next item is item 9. It's the Community Wealth Building Commission's annual report. I have a verbal update from Tom Little and Neil Reid. I am aware that we are now 2 hours and 5 minutes into the meeting, but with brevity, if I can kindly suggest from Tom and Neil, I think we can take this item just now. Tom.
Challenge accepted. I think we're going very quick because you actually you approved the text of the annual report at your meeting in June, and I committed to come back when it was in its final format, which it now is, with nice branding attached. End of report.
Well done. Are there any questions on this report? No. Well, listen, thank you very much. If that's the case, there are no items of urgent business. So if we can agree the report, there are no items of urgent business. I'm happy to bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions today. Thank you.